Let's talk about the GR Research NX Bravo. This pair was loaned to me by the manufacturer to review. I was not paid and I was not given anything in return for the review. The speaker comes in a completed form, which was sent to me with the upgraded sonic caps and the long port, which is designed to be placed a little bit further out from the room than I typically would put it. Danny did recommend to place the speaker about 3 feet off the wall. And if you don't know who Danny is, Danny Ritchie is the owner for GR Research. So I talked with him a little bit. Hey, how is this speaker designed to be listened to? Because I ask all manufacturers that. Sometimes I don't get a reply back. It's nice when I do. Another thing that Danny said was that the speaker was designed to be listened to off axis, towed out. Instead of pointed directly at you, it's meant to be towed out away from you. Like you see here in blue, where the speaker is crossing behind you, that is going to be most ideal. Price wise, you're looking at paying anywhere from about $700 for the kit version to about $2,500 for the put together, upgraded, completely nice overall finished product. So if you go to their website, you can find a couple different options. A couple things that I want to address up front, because I know I'm going to be asked and people got their own opinions about everything. I don't have room treatment in my living space. Now, I used to have a full-on dedicated home theater in my old house. I went through some pretty significant life changes, moved out of that. But here is a photo of that old house when I was building a baffle wall. I have this entire front wall covered in foam, and I had all of my side walls treated. So yes, I am aware of the benefits of proper room treatment. But in my particular house now, I just haven't found a way to make room treatment blend in with the rest of everything. But not only that, I recently did a poll yesterday and I asked my audience again, because I asked this question about a year ago. What kind of treatment do you have in your room, if any? Only about 20% of the people that replied have more than, quote, a couple panels in their room. 60% have no room treatment, and then another 20% have some little bit of room treatment. Now, the purpose of my channel is to review products as most of you would listen to them. And I will say that if I treated the room, I would really need to treat the room, but I would also need a treat for the speaker. And I've said this many times. You cannot blanket treat a room if you're swapping speakers in and out. Let me give you an example. If you have a good speaker, good dispersion, good linear on-axis response, and you put that speaker in most any room, it's going to sound good. If you take a bad speaker with poor off-axis response and poor directivity, then it's going to be very room dependent. Most poor speakers tend to have a flare in the upper mid-range, lower treble region, and those speakers benefit from sidewall absorption to cancel out those first reflections and make it sound a little bit more linear overall. So if I were to place different treatments in my room, I would have to change it up for every single review, and it just isn't feasible, honestly. Plus, I'm trying to do what you all are doing. Certainly, I could address the elephant in the room about how polarizing Danny, the owner of GR Research, can be. And I've talked to Danny. Danny was saying that he burned these speakers in and burned the speakers in for 200 hours. And I told him, quote, you know what I'm doing right now? I'm rolling my eyes. And then we kind of had a laugh about it. Danny sent me an email later about the prep work that he had done for the speakers before he sent them to me. And he even inserted in there, I know you're rolling your eyes or something like that. So we kind of have some fun about it. I'm not gung-ho on power cables, speaker cables, and all that stuff, but I am a strong proponent of good speakers. And this is a good speaker by all accounts, not just subjectively, but objectively, which we're going to talk about in the data in a little bit. When I set these up, I first started them about 3 feet into the room, or I should say 3 feet off the front wall, because that's what Danny recommends. Over time, I pushed them a little bit further back against the wall. Now, there are some things that you're always going to trade off between positioning of the speakers off the front wall. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, I've got an entire video dedicated to what you can expect when you move the speaker off the wall or when you place it closer to the wall. Personally, I like the speakers brought out from the wall about 3 feet. They just sounded better to me. I think there may be some reason for that other than just staging aspects. One is these speakers are SPL limited. So when I brought them further off the wall, they're closer to me physically. I could get them a little bit louder relative to where I'm sitting than when I push them against the wall. The overall tonality of these speakers is really nice. And the thing that I noticed most about them was that there wasn't really anything to say. Now, that said, There is a significant, and I would consider a significant, high frequency bump when the speaker is pointed directly at you. If you toe them out, as Danny recommended, then you alleviate that bump. Now, Danny told me that the reason this bump is left in the design is to make up for the narrowing high frequency dispersion. Some of you may be cynical of that, but let me just tell you right up front, if you are a fan of Peter Como and you think he is a great speaker designer, he does the same thing in some of his speakers. And I recently tested a Wharfdale Aura 2. Fantastic speaker, rising on axis frequency response because of narrowing high frequency dispersion. So when you get the speakers in the room, you have a more balanced overall timbre in room. So these things matter, and they're actually design choices. Okay. And I'm cool with that. Lesson being, don't point them directly at you unless you just like a lot of top end air. Personally, I don't like that. So I towed them out about 15 degrees, and that's where I did the majority of my listening. Usually, if you hear me talk a lot subjectively about a speaker, it's because I'm picking it apart. And I know people think I'm overly critical of speakers, and maybe I don't like all speakers or I hate all the speakers out there. That's not true, right? My purpose here as a reviewer is to provide you with information that I think is helpful to you, and then I back that up with some data. Speakers sound great to me. I really liked them. I'd have no problem owning them. A couple other aspects that I like about the speaker. One is, while it deviates from a neutral response, in the 7K region, I'm okay with that. I'm really affected and sensitive to sibilants. If there's a sharp S sound, it's very distracting to me, and I'm pretty much done listening to those speakers or that system as a whole, regardless of how good it sounds. Maybe if I take EQ and bring that down, then I'm okay. But that's a no-go for me out the gate. These speakers have a little bit of a dip through that region, and I like that. I like that from the perspective of I would rather have that than a peak. Now, do I want it to be more neutral to that region? Sure, I would prefer it to be more neutral, but the dip, I'm okay with. The other thing that I noticed about these speakers is that they did not sound forward. They still had attack and dynamicism to them. And typically I will chalk that up into the frequency region of about, let's say 1 to 4 kilohertz. Okay. So that upper mid-range area. Now, some of you may say, hey, it's all in the transients and you can verify it by looking at the group delay or the step response. I provide that in my full data set. If you're interested, you can go check that out. But I tend to find that it's easily pointable to by looking in the frequency response within that window. And then when I go and do that, what I find is it's pretty neutral through there. Now, for the estimated in-room response, which is what you can expect to hear in your room for most situations, you'll see that there's a mild little scoop through there. That tends to come off potentially as warm to some people, but I will say that it's a very mild scoop. And whether or not you're going to notice that without some direct A/B comparisons, I would say your chances are probably slim to none, if I'm being honest. The bass response in this speaker was actually surprising. So if you look at these, they have a 6.5 inch midwoofer, but honestly, they look closer to maybe a 5.5 inch or a 6-inch midwoofer. So just by looking at them, I didn't expect a lot of robust bass. And while I did not get a ton of slam and punch and those things that some people tend to like, I did get what I felt was good, accurate mid bass down into about 50 to 60 hertz in my room. Now what I would like to do is to present you with a sound clip. So the way that I do this, if you're not familiar with my channel, is I play pink noise, and then I'll play a impulse response convolved pink noise, which basically takes the frequency response of the speaker and overlays it in a way with the original pink noise. I do high pass both of these because the biggest difference some people notice is the lack of bass with the speaker version. So I've high passed the pink noise in both of these at 80 hertz, so you can focus more on the mid-range and the upper high frequency area, because that's really what the speaker's doing. Obviously, the speaker's going to roll off on the bass, and it's not really a fair comparison, and I will do this for every review going forward where I high pass it, just in case anybody's wondering. So let's do that, okay? Now that you've heard that, think about what it sounded like to you. And maybe if you want, go back real quick, listen to it again. Now, all the data that you're about to see is captured using my state-of-the-art clippable near-field scanner. This allows me to get full anechoic response from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz or higher if I wanted to, out of a garage setup like you see in this video. You don't need a $1 million or $2 million anechoic chamber. This thing pretty much takes care of all that for you. And not only does it measure the on-axis response, it measures thousands of points around the speaker and can basically say, hey, if you wanted to listen to this speaker 10 meters away at 12 degrees above the tweeter and 13 degrees off to the side, what's that response going to look like? This software and this hardware can do that for you. It's freaking amazing. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at the frequency response. You can see the bass rolls off at around 77 hertz at the F3, and then at 45 hertz, it's 10 decibels down. Now, this is why I say these speakers reach down to about 50 to 60 hertz in room. Average SPL is about 85 decibels at 2.83 volts, 1 meter. The tolerance of the speaker's frequency response is within plus or minus 3 decibels. And really, this is the only guy that kind of jumps outside of that I think is noteworthy. Now we're going to look at the CTA 2034 data set, otherwise known as the Spinorama. And there's a lot of great information packed in here, but I tend to focus on the directivity down here, and then the on-axis and listening window. So the on-axis response, or in this case, it's really the 15 degrees off-axis response, compared to the listening window, shows us that there's good continuity between the radiation pattern off to the side of the speaker and above and below it. Down here, we can kind of see something similar, but this flat line's right through here. So in an ideal speaker with excellent directivity, you would have a line going through these blue and even this red region. But that's very rarely the case, that you have a flat line, or I should say any line of some sort. Now, if it's a flat line, that means it's an omnidirectional speaker, and the steeper this line is, the more forward radiating it becomes. And this is kind of typical of a two-way speaker. To me, the thing that stands out the most is that when you get to about 4K or so, you notice that this line starts increasing pretty quickly. That's an indication of narrowing horizontal or vertical response. In this case, it's going to be horizontal mostly. Now, what happens if you pointed the speaker directly at you? You get this. And the biggest difference is this high frequency. So you got about 5 decibel high frequency bump if you point it directly at you. This is the estimated in-room response. This is what I mentioned earlier about giving you a good idea of the tonal balance of the speaker in most rooms. Okay, it's not for every room, but it's a good idea, and in my experience, it matches within about a decibel or so of what I measure in room. And this line indicates generally how I heard the speaker to be. So in-room extension to about 50 to 60 hertz. This dip around 7K relieves some sibilance, but it also takes some bite or air out of percussion instruments. Typically, cymbals is what I notice the most. Higher frequency boost on axis in black is going to be most audible. Now you'll notice I also gave you a couple different angles here. So black is 0 degrees, blue is plus or minus 15 degrees, towed in, towed out. And then estimated in-room response is going to be plus or minus 30 degrees. So a little bit more extreme. I recommend the blue setting plus about 15 degrees or so. Aim it away from you. And with that, you'll generally get pretty good in-room response and overall neutrality. Burst decay on this speaker is super clean. Like really good. And let me give you an extreme example of a speaker that costs $13,000 per pair. Good God. So all of these extensions right here are just ringing, right? And so instead of time, this is periods, and a period is a full wavelength. So basically this normalizes instead of milliseconds, because high frequencies are shorter in time and long frequencies are long in time. This normalizes everything and puts it on the same scale. So for this bad speaker, there is ringing at about 120 hertz for 8 wavelengths. And you can see again, about 500 hertz in the mid-range, extremely long decay. Now, this is down about 27 decibels. How audible is this? I don't know. But if you're looking at this yellow area, that's probably the most offensive. These hang out a long time. If I go back to the GR Research NX Bravo, this is really clean. Now let's look at the horizontal dispersion. Now I've given you a little dude's top of his head right here. This is looking down on top of the speaker, 0 degrees at the tweeter axis. The radiation pattern of the speaker is about plus or minus 70 degrees to the mid-range. So nice and wide, big soundstage. And this is if you point it directly on axis. If you tow it out, it's going to spread out even wider and get more room interaction. Now, do you need a lot of room treatment for the speaker on the sidewall? I would definitely advise against it. Now, I'm sure Danny has different ideas and different recommendations, but I would say because the speaker radiates pretty dang well off to the side that you don't need sidewall absorption. And if you did place any, I would mainly try to focus on the 50 to about 70 degrees or 60 degrees region. So relative to you, you want that angle at about 50 to 60 degrees or so relative to you to catch this higher frequency area. And what that'll do is it'll kind of mitigate this extra ballooning that you get out here. But for the most part, it really doesn't matter. As you go higher in frequency, you start narrowing up, and that gives you the overall good in-room balance that I was talking about earlier. Now, what about vertical seating? Like, do you need to sit at the tweeter level? Do you need to move down or whatever? All right. So most two-way speakers really suck at vertical seating. You're lucky if they're within about plus or minus 20 degrees. Most of them are anywhere from like 10 to 15 degrees above or below the tweeter axis or the reference axis in case it wasn't designed to be listened directly to at the tweeter. In this particular case of the NX Bravo, this sucker has a really wide dispersion angle. You can go 50 degrees above the speaker or 20 degrees below the tweeter line, and you are pretty good within that overall tonality matching region. Now let's move to the cons, because everything else objectively has been great. This speaker is SPL limited. All right. And in Danny's email to me, he did say, hey, just for what it's worth, this speaker isn't designed to get, what did he say, very loud levels or something to that effect. And that, in fact, they should be supplemented with a subwoofer. I can say that for pretty much every two-way bookshelf speaker that I've ever come across, with exception to maybe a few that cost a whole lot of money. So with that said, I kind of keep things on a level playing field, but this high frequency distortion is higher than normal. Are you going to hear that high frequency distortion? Well, it depends on the levels that you're listening to. So this is 86 decibels at 1 meter, fully anechoics, not accounting for reflections in the room and another speaker. So if you add another speaker, you're doubling the speaker and you're doubling the power. So that's an additional 6 decibels. So realistically, this is 92 decibels at 1 meter. But then when you get in the room and you're backing away, you have reinforcement of the lower mid-range, as we saw from this. And as you go higher in frequency, you have less reinforcement. Now, that less reinforcement occurs above about 4K, and you've got some reinforcement in this region. So that's going to allow you to maybe drop that overall SPL level down some, but it's kind of right in the middle of there. So my only concern here is that you could hear distortion if you're trying to play the speaker at higher levels. Okay. If you're listening to these at around 80 decibels at like 10 feet away, maybe 85 decibels in your room at 10 feet away, then you're going to be okay. But if you really try to push these, then I think you're going to run into this distortion being a potential issue. Now, what if I increase the output and go to 96 decibels? Not a lot of change through here. In my testing of the sine sweep that runs through the speaker to generate the distortion, I could definitely hear this guy. Okay. And I think it was the higher order distortions that made themselves more prominent. You also notice on the low end that the bass distortion increases. But having said that, the mid-range and the bass distortion actually are really good. What about multi-tone distortion? Because we just looked at one sine sweep, okay? Multi-tone distortion is kind of like pink noise. Multi-tone distortion shows us that about 96 decibels, it reaches over my personal threshold, which kind of gives me an indication that around 88 decibels is that point of like, and then on the higher frequency also, you may be pushing a little bit too much. If you use a subwoofer with this, it decreases the mid-range distortion, but you still have the high frequency distortion. Compression for multi-tone, long-term use, okay? You're looking at about maybe 0.75 decibels of compression. That puts, in terms of maximum output, at about 95 decibels at 1 meter. What about quick transient compression? Well, this shows me 96 decibels is probably your max. So basically, with compression, you're limited to about 95, 96 decibels or so. In terms of distortion, I would say you're probably on maybe the upper end of 80 decibels or so at 1 meter. So again, far field listening, high output volumes, probably not the speaker you need. Midfield, far field listening at reasonable volumes, you should be okay. And then we have the impedance, minimum impedance of 5 ohm, minimum EPDR at 2.5 ohm. Most amplifiers should have no trouble driving these speakers. I also wanted to point out that there is a resonance in the enclosure. Either it's from the port or it's from the enclosure itself. I'm not sure necessarily where, but it's noteworthy to note that the burst decay doesn't show this. So you can have all sorts of data, and sometimes they show different things because there's a different root cause and they have different effects. If I go and look at the frequency response, I see a little bit of a bump in that region, but I think that this particular resonance is going to be a non-issue. Something else I'll mention is the tube connectors, right? And I know that's another point of contention for some people, and that's something that Danny really, really believes in, okay? Do I believe in that? No. Have I ABX'd it blind listening? No, I would like to. And if Danny lets me hang on to these, then maybe there's some way that he and I can work out something where I can do some real true blind ABX. But until I do that, I can't say they work, but I also can't say 100% that they don't work. That said, the tube connectors make this speaker look really, really nice. And I really like that you can just pop the speaker in there or pop the cables in there. I personally would like to see every speaker come with these, not from the perspective of sound, but just from the perspective of aesthetic and use. Like they look really good. They make the speaker, in my opinion, look more clean overall. And it's really convenient just to pop the banana plugs in. Sure, other speakers come with banana plug terminals and stuff like that. That's great. That's fine. I'm not saying they don't work. I'm saying that these have that flush mount look, and it's not a cup inside the cabinet. I think it looks awesome. And if I were ever building speakers, I would probably reach out to Danny and buy the tube connectors just for that flush mount look. So that does it for the review. Hopefully you learned something and got something out of this. I do want to thank Danny for sending the speaker out to me to review. I like the speaker. I have zero qualms recommending it, especially if you get the kit version at $700. It's pretty awesome. Danny did a good job, I think, of designing the speaker. And to me, the real standout, other than just the overall tonality, is the vertical dispersion, okay? And the con is distortion. If you like what you see here, please take the time to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell for future video notifications. And if you'd like to help me out by just, I don't know, doing something, you can join me at patreon.com/Erin's Audio Corner, where you get early review information, you get behind the scenes stuff, you get stuff that I don't share publicly. And every once in a while, I do giveaways for the $10 and up tier. Alternatively, if you need to buy anything from Amazon, Crutchfield, Best Buy, Walmart, Target, AliExpress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I've got tons of generic affiliate links in my description box below. Click one of those links and buy whatever it is that you needed to buy. I get like 4%, but it definitely helps me, and I appreciate that. That's it. I will talk to you all later. And if you're going to be at Axpona and you see me and you want to, stop by and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you. That'd be cool. All right. Talk to you all later. Take care.